Good afternoon, friends, neighbors, countrymen, and barrel-chested freedom fighters from all around the world. It's another Jerry Ross here with your Tales of Patrol Base. We're lucky to have Chief Warrant Officer Timothy Smith, formerly of the 9th ID Scouts. Back in the day, we're going to talk about how they were the predecessors to the bringing LRRP back in the 1980s. And we'll talk about the Intel side of things. And I just want to, like I said, I want to introduce Chief Warrant Officer Smith, also known as DB Cooper. How did you get that nickname?
Well, that was a name, Jerry. It's great to be here. Great to talk about this wonderful unit and my time associated with it. I had dropped pretty much off the net after I retired and came back to the United States in 2001. I didn't have much of an electronic fingerprint, but I was talking about the Scout Company on YouTube, and one of the old Scouts, Dwight Dauber, who was the unit armorer, he was actually in Patrol 1-1, the very first patrol of the unit, had just joined the Long Range Reconnaissance Association and saw me talking about the unit, and he tried to figure out who I was. And I explained it, my 2 Alpha, and talked all about the commanders and the events. And subsequently, I joined Facebook, where I didn't want to be ever, and used DB Cooper as my name, because in my very, very limited airborne career, my second jump was a tree landing in Rainier training area after being a towed jumper. So I was able to get 2 jumps in, my first static line, which was really good. My second one, which covered just about every malfunction you should or should not have when you jump. But I was pretty banged up after the second jump, and subsequently missed an opportunity to go to airborne school with the 9th ID Scouts. And later on, I was within about a month or 2 of that accident, I was transferred out of the Scout Company. So
you were probably
DB Cooper is a legacy. Like, he probably landed in a tree. I definitely did.
Well, if you were a towed jumper in a CH-47 and then did a tree landing, you were probably broken up a little bit, to say
it was. I'm glad I was 19 years old.
Oh yeah, we heal faster.
We heal a lot faster with the hernias and the lower back problem I still have, and some other issues. But I didn't get hurt too bad coming down in that tree, because I did listen to some of the instructions.
Well, I'm glad you made it. Hey, can you kind of tell us how you got into the Army and into the Intel side and into the 9th ID Scouts?
Well, I grew up in central Pennsylvania, and the late 70s were a time of great turmoil economically. The Pennsylvania Railroad had shut down, a lot of layoffs where I grew up. The coal industry was declining. We had a lot of economic problems, and worldwide, the Soviets had invaded Afghanistan, Christmas of '79. There had been the seizure of the Iranian embassy. And in my town, which has the highest per capita death rate of any town in the United States, the idea that we all have to serve was drilled into my head. And as a poor kid who got into first Head Start class, and because of economic circumstances, got some of the first food stamps, free lunch program, what have you. It was very clear to me that I had to serve, and I had to pay back.
You were not born with a silver spoon in your mouth.
What's that?
You were not born with a silver spoon in your mouth.
So that's why. And then when the recruiter came, I grew up in a community, however poor it was. Excellent education, church involvement, public speaking. I thrived in school, in theater, wrestling, history. And so when the Army recruiter showed up and said, "Wow, you have all those interests. Would you like to become an intelligence analyst?" And I had no idea what that was. Said, "Well, you get to study and do history, and you like studying armies and how they're put together. This sounds like a perfect thing for you. And it requires getting a security clearance." So that was, boom, that's how we did it. Got on a train in Tyrone, Pennsylvania, got off at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri on 6th of June, 1980, on D-Day. Yeah. And went through basic training there, went to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, came in 96 Bravo, Intelligence Analyst. Had about 6 or 7 weeks to wait for my security clearance to go through. And so I continued to study. The Army education system was really amazing at the time, and you could go to the Learning Center. It's on casual status, so formation, finish whatever detail it was, and go to the Learning Center for the afternoon. Did the pre-commissioning correspondence course, did a lot of other studies of just about anything. Didn't matter what it was. They had these little cassette tape things you could play, and for 5 minutes you learn all about how to lay a mortar. Okay, I didn't know how to lay a mortar, but so I was able to absorb a lot of information. First assignment was the 7th Infantry Division, 2nd Brigade S2 shop. So that was my immediate exposure to the Army that we were at the time getting ready to transform, and it needed it bad. The low levels of poor equipment levels, deuce and a halves with only one tire on the duals, only enough fuel for maybe a total of 25 driver miles per month. So the gas was an issue, equipment was an issue. Most of the senior non-commissioned officers were Vietnam veterans waiting for retirement, and they all had a lot of issues. Many of the commissioned officers were also Vietnam veterans. And so the Army was trying to transform, where you had that upper leadership that was a remnant of the draft Army and the new volunteer Army, and then all of us young people trying to be all we could be, joining that mix. And it was real exciting. I became Soldier of the Year for 7th Division. I always wanted to go to a service academy, so I applied for West Point Prep School, went to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, and then some of those culture clashes start, your value system that I dreamed what duty, honor, country was. I start to see the reality of the Army. That's not always that. And I miss the intelligence field. I loved doing that work. And the world was continuing to change. The Army was continuing to change for the better. I said, I don't want to wait 4 years at West Point. I want to get to it now. And I didn't go to West Point. Was then assigned and struggled to go to Fort Lewis, because at Fort Lewis was this massive experiment going on. So I actually got to select and go to Fort Lewis as a PFC, which is like incredible. Had the arrogance to write the G2 and send him my resume and said, I should be assigned to the G2 and you need me. I still have copies of that somewhere. I got assigned to the G2.
Well, I'm sure you impressed
Colonel Roberts shook my hand with all my senior NCOs around. Okay. And as soon as that was over, the senior NCOs, Sergeant Meehan and Sergeant Lentz, got a hold of this skinny little butt. And they said, come here, son. What the hell? Who do you think you are? And they were some of the best non-commissioned officers. Sergeant Lynch was a 25th Infantry Division veteran from the Vietnam era. Sergeant Meehan was a long-term intelligence sergeant, had worked with White Star in Laos.
Wow.
Ate Nook Mom for lunch in the skiff, which was real nasty smelling.
Yeah,
but about that time, everything was going on at 9th ID. And there was a brand new unit that was forming, the 9th Infantry Division Scout Company. And I wanted to be a scout. So behind me, you see what the Scout Company became, what most everybody watching this program are familiar with, the long-range surveillance units, 9th ID. I can't lean the right way. But anyway, but before that became standardized across the Army, what you had was the 9th ID Scout Company. Yeah. Actually, there was no S, but it's picked up an S. 9th ID Scout was an honorific that was proposed. And it was, right at the time, was being staffed locally. So everybody who wanted to become part of the Scout Company came from Fort Lewis. So there was a tendency for some units to offload their, go ahead. You want to go to the Scouts, get the hell out of here. 2nd Battalion, 75th Rangers was at Fort Lewis. There were a lot of folks who had done Ranger time, but saw this opportunity to come to the Scout Company for reconnaissance and special missions and continue airborne status. And the company slowly brought together those sorts of people. Now, at the time, they were using a TDA, table of allowances, and it didn't have a position for intelligence sergeant or an intelligence specialist. They changed that quickly because the experiment was ongoing. So we were shaping what the force would be. And as the company commander came to G2, I kept saying, I got to be in a Scout Company. I need to be there. You need me. You need me. You need me. And Lynch and me had
DD, for just a second, can we kind of fill our listeners in on what the 9th ID was in the 80s? I remember it was like the place where they were experimenting with everything. They had the dune buggies, and they were just doing all sorts of wild and crazy stuff. It was the test bed for the Army.
It was, and that was kind of the genesis of the Scout Company. The Scout Company was a product of that experiment. One of the most important conferences that happened in Army history was the Alderbrook Conference. Alderbrook is a resort near Fort Lewis. And in this late 70s, the Army was looking at its force structure. And with the the crisis happening in the Middle East, particularly Iran, decision was to round out or try to see if we could create for the Rapid Deployment Force, is what it was called at the time, which consisted of the 82nd Airborne, the 101st, and the 24th Division Mechanized. Yeah. That grouping of divisions provided a lot of capability. The first two divisions for rapid entry and air mobility, and the third division, the 24th Infantry, of a heavy mechanized armored force.
Yeah.
But it would take a while for that 24th Division to get to the Middle East.
Yeah.
There was a gap. And the Army was looking at creating divisions, light divisions, that would not necessarily have all of the deployability as the 82nd would. It might be air landed or air lifted, but again, small strength. And the Army said, let's see if we can create a high technology light division, combining an effort at Fort Lewis, where, because the budget was opening up now, the Army decided to use and create a test bed at Fort Lewis where they could go to off-the-shelf technology and rapidly inject it into the division. Rather than wait 3 to 4 years for a piece of equipment, within 2 to 3 weeks, we might have a piece of equipment and see if it worked. Yeah. So the Alderbrook Conference came up with this idea of the force structure, what it would be: 5-5-2, 5 heavy combined arms battalions heavy, 5 combined arms battalions light, and 2 light attack battalions. And all the kinds of equipment that would go with that. Light attack battalions would have the dune buggies, assault guns would be a new kind of light tank, and then there would be a new infantry carrier, which would be much like the Stryker. Yeah. But one thing that came out of that, General Elton said, I have to be a lodgement force. I'm going to deploy this division via C-141 to a forward and intermediate staging base, and then we're going to conduct a crossload into C-130s, and I'm going to bring this high technology light division, this motorized division, into a lodgement area. Now that lodgement might be secured at a forward air base or forward facility, but he said, and he stated very specifically, that he needed a scout company. He'd just come back from Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He'd seen Delta Force, he'd seen 160th Special Operations inserting them, but realized they were a strategic asset that wasn't going to be necessarily available to him as a division commander. And he wanted that capability inherent to this very high-tech light division that had the firepower of a heavy division. And to do that, he wanted his own eyes on the ground, all-weather capability that could do what he needed so he could see what he needed to see. And the scout company fell out of that. And as people began to analyze this process, the scout company really had the majority of its operational roles and missions reflected the Army LRRP, Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol, Long Range Ranger companies from Vietnam, and the long range patrols that pre-existed before then. And in another way, to avoid some of that, believe it or not, there was a stigma then. There was a lot of bad feelings, or not bad feelings. There was a lot of remembrance of the final days of Vietnam when the LRRP companies switched from being reconnaissance force to being like an economy of force. I don't have an infantry battalion, so I'll take 2 LRRP patrols, combine them, and let them go fight, when they hadn't really had that role before. Yeah. And so there was some of that, and the desire was really specific to us that we were going to be something similar but different. Scout, as an honorific, dates back to the 6th Army Alamo Scout unit from World War II, which in 1982 was still classified. Yeah. So if there's a lineage and honor to the scout company, that's where that came from, that honorific. There was also discussion that some of that was sort of an OPSEC shield. There was so much going on at Fort Lewis, big interest to the Soviets, who would keep a intelligence collection ship parked off the coast. So that was the initial thing, the 9th ID Scout Company. That was our first symbol right there.
Yeah, oh, that's pretty cool.
We initially set up, we were formed, essentially brought together in about April of '82. There was a big We Want Scoutmen article in the Ranger. It's anybody who was wanting to do anything was wanting to be part of this. I think that there were a lot of applications, but to get accepted, you had to first go through the Scout Indoctrination program.
Kind of like
this was after you met a lot of physical requirements, MOS pretty specific. But then Scout Indoctrination program would immediately put you into the grinder. You're gonna, you went on patrols. Everybody who was coming to the Scout company had to go through the process of acceptance. It wasn't harassment. None of that occurred. It was very super professional. Either you had the skills or you didn't. And if you didn't, thank you very much. You're going back to your unit. No harm done, no foul. Thank you for showing up. At the end of the actual physical assessment, training, skills assessment was a psychological assessment that screened out many of the type A personality super snake killers that a scout reconnaissance company didn't really need. We're going to develop small patrols of 5 people, 5 soldiers operating independently for up to 5 to 10 days at the time was the thought. And those persons need to come together as a team and work together as a team. And that was part of the initial screening process. Later on, as the 9th ID Scout Company transformed through the Army's development process into the long-range surveillance companies, they stopped doing those psychological evaluations. I mean, I don't know specifically why, but I thought it was very necessary. For my time with the unit, it was very vital.
Well, you know, that's one thing I saw in LRRS, because we would get NCOs coming from Ranger Bat or from a line battalion in the 82nd or somewhere. And you kind of had to deprogram. It's like, hey, man, we're not here to do the hit. We're here to get the intel, do the target development so somebody else can do it.
You know, somebody got to lay under, you're going to lay on the ground under this tree for 5 hours and not move watching this road intersection.
Yeah, we kind of had to deprogram some people.
So I became the intelligence specialist. We had a sergeant, Staff Sergeant Hill, brilliant red hair. It's just a smart man, wonderful non-commissioned officer, been to international LRRP school, could tell you the type of variant of a tank by looking at the road wheel and a few bolts on the turret. I mean, he's that good. I came as the intel specialist. So one of my first duties was running everybody's security clearances. So I really got to know everybody in the unit because everybody's 3-9 or 8s, helping address situations like that, building up the general security posture for the organization. We were still on North Fort when I got there, and some people don't realize they look at it and they see that, you know, there's some folks who don't understand the scout thing. First off, they got that they got a cab hangover from the war on terror. I understand that, but we were on North Fort, and because of this division restructuring, we're transforming a regular infantry division into one with the dune buggies and assault guns, and some of the heavy stuff can't go. So the air defense was one of the first elements that was cut out of the force structure to come down from 19,000 soldiers to the target of 10,000. You got to get rid of a lot of things to do that.
Yeah,
it's heavy that won't fit on a C-130's got to go. So these spaces were available in the headquarters battery of 167 ADA. So because there were about 160 open slots, anybody coming into the proposed TDA Scout Company was assigned to the air defense battery. But that was just temporary. We're at North Fort Lewis, and after we began to really stand up and get multiple platoons, we moved from North Fort onto main post in the fall of 1982. I'm trying to get my years. I had my years straight. Now they're not straight. I wasn't on Fort Lewis, North Fort very long, over to 3-5 cab.
Yeah.
Well, modern barracks, nice building.
Yeah. Last time I was on North Fort, it was all World War II barracks.
That's almost all gone.
That was like 2000.
Our old compound is now the Shopette, Pizza Hut, Burger King. So the North Fort complex was pretty cool. And all your types of booby traps and punji sticks were set out in the yard.
Yeah.
Survival is discipline. Very interesting place at the time. And then we got the 3-5 cab. And so that immediately put us into, you know, the immediate challenges of trying to be a separate company that works for the division commander, administratively attached to this cab unit, because one, they got the helicopters for insertion. Plus, it provided a little bit of our administrative overhead. None of our security clearances went through them. They had like an admin function more than anything. and they wanted to always try to snatch us and put us on details or whatever. And we were fenced. That wasn't going to happen, and that caused a lot of anxiety between the two elements.
When I first came into LRRP, we were part of the MI battalion, and I preferred that because later when we went to the BFSB, and I went to a different LRRP company, and we were under a CAV squadron, and the CAV kept trying to turn us into CAV, and it's like, man, that did not work. Nobody liked it, and we didn't want to be cavalry.
So we stood up quick. I mean, there was no slowness in this unit at all. From the time that the recruiting began all the way through to our actual designation as Echo Company Scout 60th Infantry. That was the first official designation under the Long Range Surveillance MTOE. And we were still called the 9th ID Scout Company, but we officially became Echo Company Scout 60th Infantry. It wasn't until about 84, 85, then when the formal all across the Army long range surveillance company structures were formalized, and that we were then attached to the 109th MI Battalion. And I think you're going to interview General Pat Hughes, upcoming, who was the battalion commander and really made all that happen. Then finally in the right place with the right kind of oversight, battalion oversight, to do what long range needs to do. And it took a while to make that happen.
Well, I haven't stood up some units before. I'm sure you had a lot of memorable characters. And
wow, we had some really wonderful characters. Master Sergeant Babb, who was he's just the greatest guy. He was, at the time I knew him, he was our operations NCO. We had Master Sergeant DeMoisy, whose background was all special operations. He was deep into various organizations that had just been stood up at the strategic level in special operations. Knew all of that. Most Sergeant Loperfido was our communications sergeant, who refused. He was never going to go airborne, but he was one of the people that set up our communication system and really got us communicating and using the whole breadth of tools: one-time pads, dynamic system, data burst, long-range communications, HF. Probably forgot more about radios than most of us will ever know.
We're probably making
all.
That's the kind of guy that makes comms off a barbed wire fence.
Hey, Mike Ball, who could shoot it anywhere. Mike Ball, we call him Bigfoot because he's about, I don't know, 6'9". Just a wonderful guy. Mike Ball is one of those people. Dwight Dauber, the first armor. Well, I'm going to leave out way too many names. I don't want to do that. Carl McGowan was one of my first friends. Carl was he was one of those stud infantry guys, 2nd 75th. Scuba, Halo qualified, jump master, Ranger tab, and brilliant, and just brilliant. Wanted to do it all. And I was very fortunate becoming friends with Carl. He's dead. They passed away far too soon. We had just reconnected, in fact, after all these years. He was in Korea working intelligence. I convinced him to switch his MOS from 11 Bravo to 96 Bravo, my MOS, because I was out of the unit then. I had gone to 3rd Brigade. We stayed in touch, though. Stayed at his house all the time. Said, you need to change your MOS. You're going to get a $25,000 bonus, Carl. You're going to go to Fort Huachuca. You and your wife have a great time down there. And you come on back to Fort Lewis and go right back to Scout Company, be the intel sergeant. And he did it. And I was very, very happy that I was able to find someone like him to kind of be my replacement. And here's another one. Lieutenant Evans, boy, we didn't have too many officers then. We had Captain Richardson, who was the commander, and we had Lieutenant Evans, who was our operations officer. Lieutenant Evans was a West Pointer, and he had this list that he would keep every single, turn out the lights, turn on the lights, make the coffee, empty the coffee, everything he had to do. And Richardson drove him like, the fly swatter in a cow.
Worked him.
He had no time to himself. He's always rushing around. Well, Evans, I didn't really know the impression I had made on Evans because he was always Lieutenant Evans. He was always that officer. I left the unit, and I didn't see him again until the reunion we had at Fort Lewis in 2018. And there's Captain Evans. And I had always felt bad about some circumstances at the company, some problems. I always felt I wasn't adequate, didn't do the right things, blah, blah. And I got to drive him around for a little bit and got to see just how much he really appreciated what I did for him. That was kind of neat catching up, after all these years of feeling inadequate, to have him say, "You were the smartest, you were the one who made this all happen, Smitty." But Evans had the teddy bear. Evans had a teddy bear. Every time he jumped, he would stick that thing down at his harness around his gonads. Well, at the time, I can finish this story because it's real funny. At the time, this wasn't funny. All the hostages were being taken to Lebanon.
Yeah.
So it's some element of the scout company, I won't say whom, kidnapped his teddy bear and held his teddy bear and did the whole terroristic shots with the Polaroids. The teddy bear with the mask. They cut off a portion of the teddy bear's ear and sent it to him as blackmail to release the teddy bear. He had to put a keg of beer in the day room, which he did, and he got his freaking bear back. And he actually brought the bear to the reunion in 2018, which just blew me away. So those are the kind of people that were in the scout company.
Hey, we've got about 6 minutes left, and you've had a phenomenal career. And you were telling me earlier, you were talking about when you were head of reconnaissance for the OPFOR out at NTC. And you told me, you said your time in that scout unit basically taught you so much. And can you just kind of elaborate on some of the lessons you used back then to what you learned from there and how you carried it forward?
Well, I had a great career. I left the scout company with the 3rd Brigade of the 9th ID, which was the high-tech brigade. So I was able to take all the scout knowledge, walk in and be running the 9th ID tactical command post as a buck sergeant. No one over me. Loved it. Went from there to division artillery in Korea, learned how to plot nuclear targets to blow away the North Koreans if they ever tried anything. That was fun. Went to Germany, worked as an indications and warning analyst at headquarters USARA, watching for warning of war. So taking all of the knowledge of reconnaissance that we had used to train the scouts, then going to sit at the theater level to figure out, okay, how am I going to destroy a Soviet invasion coming into Western Europe as a buck sergeant was pretty interesting time. I got picked up for warrant officer out of that. Went to Fort Irwin, California with the OPFOR. So I spent 68 rotations, 5 years in the desert with the OPFOR as both the senior intelligence technician, as well as later on the collection manager and chief of reconnaissance. So the big thing the OPFOR had, it was one of its strongest advantages, no matter what anybody thinks about the OPFOR, it was its divisional or deep reconnaissance teams that would go out and sit on the hilltops and observe the Blue Four in the lead up to any major training event. And working with them and remembering, finally being able to do in a near operational sense, putting out reconnaissance teams, teaching them, and also helping better, not only just replicating the threat, but helping the Blue Forces understand how can you beat a strong ground reconnaissance force. Really brought it all to a head. Just enjoyed the hell out of it. I think we made a big difference. I mean, I know that there's been a lot of folks and memories, and I hope we can go back and relearn some of those. But that carried on with me. I then went back to Germany for the war in Bosnia Herzegovina, and then worked after that. I retired as a contractor, helping round up war criminals and taking them to justice at the War Crimes Tribunal. So, one thing I learned from the scouts, I still do, is the power of all my notes on 3x5 cards. If I ever lose my 3x5 cards, we're doomed. But
I had a lieutenant because I did everything on 3x5 cards. And as a platoon sergeant in a regular airborne infantry, on my platoon leader, I had a great platoon leader. But he's like, "Why do you do everything on 3x5 cards?"
That's how we won Desert Storm.
That's like, it's just all I've done. Yeah. And you bring up a fascinating fact. The Warsaw Pact in Russia, they are definitely they were using playing from the same book we were as far as LRRS, and it's probably carrying forward to the Ukrainian war today.
They had the Soviets had a very sophisticated human intelligence capability that extended all the way from the KGB all the way down to regimental level.
Yeah.
And They not only had it, they practiced it and used it all the time.
Yeah.
We're seeing now the advent of what our future LRS will be going on in Ukraine. We'll have a much more mobile, light reconnaissance, surveillance element that's operating deep, that's mobile, that has the power to not only see its target, to see the threat, but then either directly or indirectly immediately destroy it.
Yeah.
And those are capabilities that we've had before. We backed off of it because we are afraid of the legacy of reconnaissance killing things on their own. And that's how, you know, the LRS history up until it went away. The future LRS is going to be the most sophisticated light strike reconnaissance force this country has ever deployed. I sure hope I think I'll be alive while we do it. And I hope that they'll be able to look to some of these classes you're doing and the stories you're getting, Jerry, and capture that. It's really vital. I'm so glad you're doing it.
Well,
thanks for having a leg on your show. I hope I can get back and come back and say some more.
Well, I tell you what, let's at the next LRRA rally in Branson.
I'll be there. Got my room already.
And you know, let's see if we can maybe we can sit and drink a beer and do like a little show there.
Happily.
And let's definitely stay in touch.
Hey, 296 days in the wake up. Not that I'm counting, but
yeah, I can't believe that we didn't talk.
I don't know. You know how it is. There's like 300 people there.
It was it.
We had a bunch of new people come in. I don't know. I'll definitely look you up next time, Gary.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to cut this short and stay on and we'll get this done. Hey, freedom fighters. I hope you all enjoyed the chief and God bless America. And we're going to do some more of these coming up and they're going to be great.